pleasure. Okay, and with that, take it away, Jackie.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thanks for coming out tonight to this. To our webinar, Is Ukraine Headed for Peace or Nuclear War? It's sponsored by the Peace in Ukraine campaign of Massachusetts Peace Action. Richard Krushnick will be our speaker tonight, and I will be your host. I'm Jackie King, and I'll be your host. We're meeting in perilous times, as I'm sure most of you feel. Many experts believe we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been, including during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And while there are deepening contradictions and conflicts around the globe, many experts believe that the Ukraine war is the most likely to provide the flashpoint that could set off a nuclear exchange that could in turn escalate into Armageddon. And yet, this possibility is seldom addressed in a serious way by our politicians or our mainstream media. And that's why we organized this webinar and have called on Richard Krushnick to lend his technical expertise and historical insight to discussing this urgent question. Richard has a master's degree in multinational corporate political economy. He's a longtime expert and author in the analysis of military weapons and strategy, in particular, the political and economic influence of the military-industrial complex. He's active in Massachusetts Peace Action's Nuclear Disarmament Working Group and in the Latin America and Caribbean Working Group. A quick word about logistics. Ahead of time, Richard will speak for about 30 minutes, and I'll give you a signal, Richard, when it's 25 minutes. And then MAPPA's executive director, Brian Garvey, will let you know about some actions that you can take. And then we'll have about 30 minutes for questions and answers. So I know Richard has a lot to cover. Take it away, Richard.
Okay. Is my sound good for you all?
Sound great, Richard.
Okay, very good. Notwithstanding the picture presented in the U.S. mass media, my research and all the experts I listen to indicate that Russia has essentially won the war in Ukraine. I think that's actually a more accurate statement than to say Russia is winning the war in Ukraine. I will explain later on what makes me feel pretty certain about that. But for the moment, I'll just assert that. And the US and Western Europe cannot do anything about this with conventional weapons. No matter what they do, whether they forward tomahawks or whatever else they want to do, they cannot change the outcome of this war with conventional weapons. So the question arises, are there circumstances where the U.S. would feel it important enough or feel desperate enough that they would introduce a few tactical nukes into the conflict in Ukraine in the hopes that that might lessen Russia's demands or, certainty about obtaining all of its objectives or what have you. And in the Middle East, Israel is in a very bad situation. It's overextended in Syria and Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank and with the Houthis. And there's no end in sight for any of this, including in Gaza. And to take, so it's not sustainable for very long. Israel is too divided internally. Its economy is suffering too much. Uh, its military assets, in spite of the fact that they're all provided on a continuing basis with the US, are not sufficient to carry this struggle on and all these different fronts for very long. If things remain sort of as they are, the Netanyahu government will fall. And the experts I listen to, which I will discuss also later on, and my own analysis indicate that the only way Netanyahu and his coalition can stay in power is by making another attack on Iran and getting the US to join the fight. And most of the people I respect their judgment on think this will probably happen relatively soon, within a month or so. And if that happens, they and my analysis all agree that the Iranian response will be far more devastating to Israel than was the case in its response in the 12-day war last June. In a conflict with Iran, Israel is nothing. Israel has lost probably at least 1 million of its Jews. It's probably no more than 6 million left. They're fleeing the country. The economy is in a shambles, you know. 6 million Jews cannot fight a population 15 times larger. Israel cannot fight a country that has a land area 75 times larger. The idea of a conflict between Iran and Israel using conventional weapons is a joke. If Israel attacks Iran, Iran will respond with a devastating attack on Israel. And then the question is, will the US come in to save Israel? My analysis and everybody else that I listen to says, yes, it will, because of the power of the Israeli lobby in our political sphere and because of the self-interest of the military-industrial complex. If that happens, the analyses get a little more varied at this point, but most of them, and my own included, think that the US and Israel combined cannot win in a conflict with Iran. Of course, that's partly because they're engaged in so many other conflicts at the same time, but nonetheless, that they cannot win a conventional conflict. They would lose a conventional conflict with Iran. So then the question arises, as Israel is going down, will it resort to the Samson option and attack Iran with tactical nuclear weapons? If it does so, this is called the Samson option in Israel, because they know that if they do start a nuclear war in the Middle East, it may well mean the end of Israel. It may well bring the temple down on their heads, just as happened to Samson in the Old Testament. That's why they call it the Samson option. So the direction of events in both conflicts at this time bring nuclear war closer as the conflicts go on. So I'm not going to go into Ukraine now, into the Middle East conflict now, although people want to raise that in the discussion, that's fine. I'm going to talk about why the Ukraine war is moving toward nuclear war. And most of my talk is actually just going to be about background fundamentals, because that's really the most important. And I really feel that without understanding these basic points, it's virtually impossible to understand the context in which this conflict is unfolding and to have any possible way to determine the direction of events. So some of these things that I think are very important to understand, I will run through right now. First is the US exit from all of the nuclear treaties, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Iranian Nuclear Treaty, The only treaty we have left is the START treaty, which expires in 4 months. That's what limits intercontinental ballistic missiles, the super big bombs, the strategic nuclear weapons to 1,500 warheads on a side. But if that expires in February, we could very well see within a few months the one missile, the one warhead on each of the 400 Minuteman missiles in their silos turn into 8 warheads on each missile. We could see the one missile on each Trident, one warhead on each Trident missile on the submarines, of which there's nearly 600 of them. We could see each missile with one warhead turning into a missile with 3 to 8 warheads on it. The the horror that the end of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty could, I mean, it could bring to the world, the New START Treaty, excuse me, are so horrific, it's almost beyond imagination. And that treaty must be extended. It has to be extended. There's a congressional letter advocating that it needs to turn into legislation. But at any rate, after the talk and some of the back and forth, Brian will lead us through something that we can do about the increasing likelihood of nuclear war. Second, difference between the old generation of nuclear weapons and the new generation. In the old generation, there weren't that many intermediate range things. There were all these big intercontinental things. They were very inaccurate, 200-300 yards inaccurate. You had to try a target at with multiple warheads to have a chance of getting it and all this kind of stuff. It really was mutual assured destruction. Nuclear war meant annihilation for both sides. But now we have a new generation of nuclear weapons. Both the strategic ones and the new tactical ones are precision guided. They're not inaccurate like the old ones. They can hit their targets perfectly. They have these new tactical nuclear warheads, lower yield, epitomized by the B-12, which you can dial the blast force that you want on the weapon. You can have 1/43rd the blast force of the Hiroshima bomb. You can have 1/3 the blast force of the Hiroshima bomb. You can have 3 1/3 times the blast force of the Hiroshima bomb. You can tailor the bomb to the target you're attacking to minimize collateral damage, which would have been planet ending in the old generation of nuclear weapons. This makes the use of these new tactical nuclear weapons much more appealing, much more likely. And to make matters worse, all the major powers and probably all the nuclear powers have already integrated these new tactical nuclear weapons with pinpoint accuracy and variable blasts into their battlefield planning. They've already planned for the contingencies under which they would use nuclear weapons on the battlefield, low yield tactical nuclear weapons. This is now part of our official warfighting doctrine and strategy and tactics that that commanders are being trained in. Conventional commanders are know when they are supposed to start using nuclear weapons, and they will be empowered to do so under the current nuclear doctrines. Extraordinarily dangerous. The U.S. objective in all wars after Vietnam has been to preserve U.S. global hegemony, to be the sole superpower. That's what Afghanistan and Iraq were all about. They were straddling Iran because Iran is the strategic center of the Middle East and West Asia. It is on the only country on the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf, these two world dominating pockets of oil and gas. They're the shortest route for pipelines going in various directions. You've got to gain some control over Iran if you want to still be the sole nuclear hegemon. Well, we know what happened in those two wars. They failed. And in Iraq, Iran is now more powerful than it was before the war began. The Syrian war, the Libyan war, they're all about the same objective: preserving global U.S. hegemony, preventing the arrival of the multipolar world. That's what the neocons are all about. That's the basis of their ideology. That's been the policy ever since 2001. It's official. It's in the doctrines. It's in the policy. The U.S. will do whatever it can to eliminate any country that threatens U.S. global hegemony. And so that's what it's all about, and that's what's going on in the Middle East right now and in Ukraine. It's the U.S. attempt to extend the period of U.S. hegemony. Unfortunately, that period has already ended, and the multipolar world has arrived. It's already here. It's blossoming. But the military, industrial, congressional think tank complex in the US and Western Europe refuse to admit the new reality in the world. They are still struggling to figure out how they can, to the extent possible, extend some kind of a dominant position in the world order. The question is, how far will they go before they give up and accept the new reality which is sweeping the world? In Ukraine, for example, the US sanctions have backfired completely. The Russian economy is fine. The Russian trade with the US and Western Europe has gone to China, India, and others in the global south. All the US has accomplished is driving Russia and China into each other's arms and causing the newborn bricks to flower and blossom and grow and strengthen their economic ties. The sanctions have even weakened the US dollar because all the new trade that has shifted to China and India is going on in their own currencies. The status of the US as the dominant and sort of only really reliable global trading currency is history. It's getting less and less every year. Because of all of this, we've had a parade of former secretaries of state, former secretaries of defense, former committee members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, scholars, military experts, retired intelligence and military professionals, all telling us that we're in more danger of nuclear war today than we've ever been in our entire history. Well, actually, some of them don't say that. They say since the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62. Finally, I must say, as a backgrounder, and I will explain why later on, that the US is primarily responsible for this war, not Russia. No matter what the US public says, what its officials says, what its mass media say, what the generations of anti-Russian propaganda have tried to get everyone to believe or think, Russia is not the primary aggressor in this war. Russia is defending itself. It's defending itself from US nuclear missiles on its border with Ukraine. Just like the US would never permit Russia to continue holding nuclear-tipped missiles in Cuba in 1962. It's the same damn thing. And Russia has every right to defend itself against Ukraine joining NATO, because that's what it would mean if Ukraine joined NATO. So ever since Clinton, NATO has been moving eastward. More than 20 nations have joined since the original forming of NATO. Moved right up, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states. What's left? Ukraine and Georgia. That's always been Russia's only ironclad red line. No Georgia or Russia in Ukraine. Russia took care of that problem in Georgia with the conflict in 2008. And that's the conflict that it's been engaged in essentially ever since 2014, when it began with the US-aided coup d'etat and with the beginning of the shelling of the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, where most Russians are located in Ukraine. So the war was already 8 years old before Russia invaded in 2022. And when Biden in September of 2021 issued his directive saying that he intends to continue full speed ahead and redouble efforts to get Ukraine into NATO, he knew what the result would be, and he wanted it. And that was the war in Ukraine. And as soon as he did that, as soon as Biden did that, remember, after 2014 and the beginning of all this stuff, the first Trump administration built up the Ukrainian army so it could fight the Russians. Biden continued that. And then in September, he signals his intention to keep going full force. He knew Russia would invade. And as soon as he said that, Russia started mobilizing on Ukraine's border for the invasion a few months later. So I know that MAPA is split over this. A lot of people in MAPA still buy that Russia is the primary aggressor in this conflict. They still think that there's danger that Russian appetite might be greater than just Ukraine. All the people I respect their analysis and their objective research provides absolutely no evidence for any of this. In fact, it documents that Russia not only has no interest in any appetite beyond Ukraine, but it has no capacity for dealing in any appetite beyond Ukraine. In fact, it indicates that there's no evidence whatsoever that Russia has any interest in conquering eastern Ukraine. The last thing it wants is interminable guerrilla warfare in western Ukraine, backed by the Western industrial powers, with Ukrainians that hate Ukraine. Well, I'm already way behind my schedule here, so I guess enough of all this background stuff. Uh, so, let me truncate what the rest I was going to say, and start with why do I think Russia is winning or has essentially already won the war in Ukraine? How dare I say such a thing against what we are told by our leaders and many of our leading thinkers? I think I'm better off just reading this paragraph. Russia's winning because it has always had at least a 5-to-1 advantage in artillery and ammunition. Varying degrees of dominance, but always a dominant position to some degree in the air. A roughly 10-to-1 advantage in missiles and precision-guided bombs, with superior ability of Russian systems over the systems provided to Ukraine by the West. More extensive and higher quality air defenses, the ability to match and exceed Ukrainian ground forces and their skill anytime that's needed. Often in the conflict, most of the time, Russia's had less soldiers and other military involved in the conflict than Ukraine has had, because it doesn't need them, because it has all this advantage in all its weaponry and technology and so on. But anytime it needs to put more forces in Ukraine, it can do so. But Ukraine can't. Every day that goes on, it can put less and less forces on the ground in Ukraine. The kill ratio, I believe, in spite of what the West is telling us about the kill ratios of more Russians die than Ukrainians die. People I listen to and my own analysis indicates that on average over the course of the war so far, 5 Ukrainians have died for every Russian that's died in the conflict. And I believe that currently, now that Russia has essentially won the war, the Russian kill ratio is nearly doubled to almost 10-1, with 10 Ukrainians dying for each Russian. Remember that in World War II, the last year of the war, when the war was already over, everyone knew that it was over. Germany had lost the war. But more people died in the European conflict in the last year that died in all the rest of the war. So even though Russia has essentially won the war, oh, there's a lot of Ukrainians that still have to die if the war continues. Because the longer it continues, the Russian victory will be greater and the mess in Ukraine will be even more pathetic. So Russia's winning in its prime objective, which is to demilitarize Ukraine. And the longer it goes on, the slow grinding down of all personnel, all equipment continues until, if it goes on long enough, there won't be anything left of Ukraine's military fighting capability.
Richard,
Now,
five
what makes
minutes. You got
what?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So I think since I'm going against the grain and humbly trying to challenge those in the MAPA community who disagree with this analysis and who are more sympathetic to the other analysis, I guess you would say, I want to let you know what my sources are. Why do I conclude this? Well, I trust the former what is it? Former intelligence professionals for peace, far more than I trust the mainstream media and the military and industrial complex think tanks and the mass media. I trust them far more. And some of them include Ray McGovern, who was a career Russian senior analyst at the CIA. He was the daily briefer, CIA briefer for President Reagan. Larry Johnson, another senior career CIA analyst. Scott Ritter, the weapons inspector who informed us in Iraq that there were no weapons of mass destruction, as were claimed. Colonel Wilkerson, who MAPA has sponsored on several occasions in webinars, who is a retired military colonel, and he was the chief of staff of Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State. Gosh, who else? I rely heavily on what's his name? I'm sorry. Let me look at my list for just a moment. Oh yeah, good old Chris Hedges. I think you all know him. Oh, don't forget John Mersheimer, the amazing analyst in the realist school, professor of strategic studies. He's at the University of Chicago, right? Who else? Well, I listen a lot also to Max Blumenthal of the Gray Zone. His research is impeccable. And also Jeffrey Sachs, the international consultant, the latter two not being members of the former intelligence professionals for peace. But beyond that, these people that I listen to on a daily basis, every single day for the last 2 years, I have watched the military summary and the Weeb Union analysis of what's going on a daily basis on the battlefield. They draw on all sources, Ukrainian sources, Russian sources, US sources. They draw on the US military company funded Institute for the Study of War. They rely on the Institute for the Study of War. They have all kinds of people who send them stuff. They get videos from the soldiers on the ground on both sides in the conflicts. They get videos from the Russians and from the Ukrainian governments They get analysis and posts from both governments. They use all this information to analyze what's going on the battlefield every day. And I see with my own eyes the bombs exploding, the factories disappearing, the soldiers getting killed, the territory changing, documented by who's there on the ground. And the main documentation is when Ukraine attacks Russians here, you know that the Russians have taken that over because now they're being attacked, and vice versa. Uh, I find the evidence totally compelling. There is no question that Russia has essentially won this war, and the longer it goes on, there will be only more Ukrainian dead and less Ukrainian infrastructure left to rebuild the place. Am I out of time now?
Yes, yes.
All
Just
right, may I
yeah.
have just 1 or 2 minutes for one final point that I didn't
Okay.
get to? How would a nuclear war in Ukraine happen? Let's assume for the moment that I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't think it's more than 50% likely, but it might be something like that. It's pretty scary. In their desperation to avoid a resounding Russian victory in Ukraine, would the US use a few tactical nuclear weapons on the concentrations of Russian forces in Ukraine to see if maybe that would make Russia back off somewhat, not insist on all of its demands, and so on? Well, all the people who I respect and listen to, and my own analysis indicates that that indeed is a possibility because of those factors that I mentioned before and all these changes that have happened in the arena of nuclear war fighting and weapons and doctrine and all of that kind of stuff, as well as the U.S. not being willing to forget about hegemony at this point in time. So if the U.S. does that, what are the Russians going to do? Everybody I listen to and my own analysis indicates that they would respond with nuclear weapons in Ukraine. It's always Ukrainians that are going to do the dying in Ukraine with an equal attack. Or some of them think that the attack would be even greater, indicating that Russia is willing to go up the escalatory ladder if the US wants to carry what it just started with nuclear weapons any further. Another very likely option, because the United States has a habit of starting wars with false flag operations, like the attack on the destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, the attack that never happened, but the CIA said it happened. And that justified starting bombing North Vietnam and so on. There are many examples of the US use of false flag operations. So the US may just use a very small tactical nuke on some concentration, presumably not a very important one or something like that, but some concentration of Ukrainian forces. And then, of course, blame the Russians for it to justify the use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield. So anyway, I will leave it at that and we'll continue.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Very, very sobering.
I'm
Okay.
trying to be scary. It's
No,
Halloween.
no, well, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Very terrifying. Let's put it that way. Where's Brian? Brian, are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here.
Okay. Are are you gonna do you want to do this now or do you want to do it after the Q&A?
Oh, no, I'd be very happy to do it now, and it only takes a moment. One thing
Okay.
at Mass Peace Action that we always want to encourage people to do is to use the knowledge that you've just gained and turn it into some advocacy. Right now, the US Congress has not been very good, as I'm sure many of you know, in terms of advocating for negotiations to end this war at the negotiating table rather than on the battlefield. Many military leaders, including the former Joint Chiefs of Staff chair, Mark Milley, said just about a year and a half into the war, okay, they should stop now and negotiate because this is the best deal that Ukraine is likely to get. That radical, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, even he was calling for negotiations. At one point, there was a letter among progressive Democrats. This was quite famous when it came out. There are about 19 of them that signed. It was led by the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal, calling for negotiations. It was very mild. It even credited the Biden administration for sending weapons, which is something many in the peace movement are rightly skeptical of. But even that mild letter encouraging negotiations to end the war got so much criticism, especially from Democratic leadership, that it was pulled about 24 hours after it was released. And since then, there has been very, very little rhetoric in support of negotiations, especially from Democrats. We've actually seen more from some congressional Republicans, but not nearly enough in a war that many, many people are saying should be ended at the negotiating table. Some claim that there isn't a military way forward to end this war in a meaningful way. But we need to make that demand of our legislators to let them know that we're worried about the possibility of World War III, that we are worried about the last strategic arms limitation treaty, that being New START, that Richard mentioned. It expires in a few months in February. If we let it expire, it could lead to another nuclear buildup. And as a nuclear disarmament group at Mass Peace Action, that's just going to mean more work for us, right? So I just put in the chat a link that you can, if you're here in the United States, you can click it, put in your address, it will automatically look up who your representative in the House and your senators are. If you're outside of Massachusetts, works all over the country. And you can send them a message saying you support negotiations and you expect them to act accordingly. And also, we've helpfully included at Richard's suggestion that they support and encourage President Trump and his administration to extend New START. This should not be controversial. In fact, it was an Obama era treaty that was then extended by President Biden. And President Putin of Russia and Trump have said that they are both looking at the possibility to extend it. So it is a possibility. I like to, I know you're trying to scare everyone, Richard, and it's appropriate. But I like to remind people that activists can make a difference, right? In the 1980s, the Freeze movement, which is the precursor to mass peace action and peace action generally across the country, they convinced the ultimate Cold Warrior, Ronald Reagan, who was pushing for a nuclear buildup. We had 70,000 nuclear weapons worldwide. Even Ronald Reagan, by the end of his administration, was advocating for nuclear abolition. Now, we didn't get there. We still have about 12,500 nuclear weapons. But that makes a huge difference. That is over 50,000 fewer chances for nuclear accidents, for rogue commanders, for even criminals who might want to sell a nuclear device to a non-state actor, right? Less of these nuclear weapons, exactly 12,500 too many, says Jane, especially when you consider that maybe 200 or 300 of these could cause nuclear winter, which would wipe out civilization. And if you also care about the money side of it, right now they're talking about modernizing our nuclear weapons arsenal to the tune of somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion. Knowing how the government spends its money, I think that'll probably end up being closer to $3 trillion. So why don't we save that money and spend it on healthcare, education, infrastructure, things that are actually going to benefit people, rather than something that if we ever use it, kiss civilization goodbye. I promised in the chat, and this is a useful argument that I like to use, although I love the guys and gals that you mentioned, the Jeffrey Sachs of the world, um, John Mearsheimer, of course. But if you're trying to convince someone who's really, supportive of backing this war to the very last Ukrainian, one person to quote is Obama, President Obama, who deserves a lot of blame as well. But back in 2016, when he was taking criticism for not giving more weapons to Ukraine, he himself said, Ukraine, it's right on Russia's border. It's much more important to their interests than ours. We haven't let them in NATO. We've left them dangling out there. And if we're not clear about when we'll fight and when we won't, if we're murky about that line, we're going to end up in war. And that's exactly where we are. When you're not willing to negotiate and say what you'll accept and what you won't, it often leads to an exchange of arms. Seen that in many, many wars over the years. So, talking and negotiations and diplomacy, it's just more effective. This war is not working. It's not working to weaken Russia, as I've heard members of Congress say in a very callous way. And it's not working for the people of Ukraine either, or the people of Russia. Uh, both sides are suffering, and what is needed are negotiations, and we should be demanding that so we can keep our money and so we can prevent more death and destruction in Eastern Europe. So thanks for hearing me out. I'll put it once more in the chat. Takes 30
Thank you,
seconds.
Brian.
Take the action, use the knowledge that Richard has given us tonight.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And people can be doing that if they want during the discussion. Yeah, we are going to take questions by people raising their hands. If you could use that function, the raise hand function in your React button. And we'll start with Jeffrey Barkdal. I'm going to ask that people keep their comments somewhat brief. You don't have to just ask a question, but we do want to give everybody a chance to talk. So try to keep your comments brief. Thanks. Okay, Jeffrey. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So Richard, who's at first off, who's at fault? Second, how can we prevent a nuclear winter? A nuclear war. Three, three, what can we do during the 2026 presidential election involving around all this? And four, don't they, I put in the comment section saying, don't people understand that war is pocket change that can be invested in peace? You could make more money from peace than war. And on a personal note, we could probably we could probably we should probably stay in contact because I think I got such information that you might be interested in. If you know what I
Okay,
mean.
thank you.
Okay, Richard.
Well, I've already stated where the balance of guilt, I guess you could say, lies for this war. It's with the U.S. Expansion of effort to expand NATO to Russia's borders and put nuclear missiles on its border. I believe that that's the primary reason for this war. And we can only prevent nuclear war by doing what Brian has suggested. Uh, and unfortunately, that as well is not looking too good. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Russians and the US had hundreds of people every day working on negotiations over nuclear issues. either negotiators themselves in various organizations and at various levels, uh, or a multitude of people doing research and backup work for people who were negotiators. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, nothing is happening. There is no conversation. There are no experienced negotiators. They're dead or retired. Uh, we have a long way to go before you can't negotiate unless the negotiators at the table trust each other. And that is not easily built. Let's see, where else did you take us? That's how to end it, or how to prevent it. I'm not sure I'm remembering your other two questions, but I'll gladly stay in touch.
Okay, let's keep moving on then. Donald Smith.
Yes. Okay. So thank you, Richard, for your analysis. You're brave to come out and say that America is the main aggressor. I tend to agree with you. But as you know, the peace movement is divided. Even people like Noam Chomsky, Nathan Robinson, Medea Benjamin, Norman Solomon will say, well, Russia is still the main person because they did the war, despite all these evil provocations. Anyway, you didn't. You said the U.S. is the aggressor. Russia has won, and we might have a nuclear war. All sound reasonable, but you said there's a disagreement within MAPA. You didn't say what that disagreement was. What part of your message does MAPA do parts of MAPA disagree with you on?
What you just said, that some people think Russia is the primary aggressor, and that you have to stop the Russians because they likely have an appetite for more than just Ukraine. That's my understanding is that there are a significant number of people in MAPA who, to that extent, are sort of aligned with the U.S. government and the objectives that it has in the war. Which
Okay,
is,
wait, let me just say that though the position of MAPA, and I would say the majority of people in MAPA do not support continued military
yeah,
aid,
yeah.
support Ukraine to the last Ukrainian,
And everybody in MAPA would love negotiations at this point.
Yeah, I want to clarify, if I can quickly. I think there's several positions. One is the mainstream position is Russia is totally at fault. I think people like Noam Chomsky, Nathan Robinson, Medea Benjamin, Norman Solomon say, yeah, America was pretty evil in their provocations, but still, Russia still shares most of the responsibility. After all, they launched it. And then people like you and me are brave or maybe stupid enough, I'm sorry to say, because people are going to attack us, to say, hey, I'm sorry, U.S. is the real aggressor. If you look at the history, U.S. is the real aggressor here and is super hypocritical about it if their tables were turned. But so anyway, my suspicion is that it's not that people like, it's not like Medea or Noam Chomsky or Nathan Robinson. They don't think the U.S. is innocent. They say both sides are at fault. Now, maybe they're just saying that to be diplomatic or to protect themselves.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
That's good. All right. Robert Richard is the next question.
Did we lose Robert?
I think we might have lost
him. I'm sure he'll probably
okay. He can go.
Technical difficulties.
How about Benjamin Abelow?
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Benjamin.
Yes. Hi. Let me just get my video on. Yeah, I actually don't have a question. Just I'm actually the author of a short book on the Ukraine war that I wrote kind of in white heat right after the war started. It was published by the summer of 2022. Anyway, the book is still available for sale. It's out in I think 8 or 9 languages now. But I've also made it available in, I have copyright control over the English, French, and German editions. So I've made those available as free PDF downloads if anyone wants. So I just posted into chat the link to the free download page. And also, if I'm not trying to pitch myself heavily here, but if anyone decides they want to, read a print edition or the ebook, you can buy those on Amazon. Also, if Mappa or anyone else gets involved and wants to distribute copies for free as an educational activity, you can get in touch with me. I'll put my email address here, and I can, try to get you books at cost. So let me just put in my email address here also.
Thanks for the offer, Benjamin. I'll get in touch with you offline.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, that's really it. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but
Okay.
thanks.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Yes, that's an excellent book, by the way. I might have not have been calling on people in the right order here. Okay, Mek Sibanda.
Okay, thank you so much. Mine is a short one about trumping. Yes, I've been involved with the International Visitor Program some 20 years back in the USA, when I also had an opportunity to visit the White House, met the Congress, and also discussed about the Global South policy and the foreign policy of USA. We didn't really deep dive into the Constitution of USA, but now my simple question is, where does Trump get all the powers? I mean, if you look on how he's conducting business. Thank you.
He doesn't legally have all of the power that he's exercising. And as you're probably aware, there are, I don't know, more than a half dozen court decisions that have enjoined firings that he's made, financial cuts that he's made, various things that he's done that, according to the justice system, he does not have the power to do. Problem is that the Justice Department doesn't have its own army or its own police force. It doesn't have the physical means to enforce its decisions over Trump. And so far, the armed personnel who operate under Trump in various organizations have not been willing to aid the Justice Department in enforcing the law. That's where Trump gets the power to exceed his legal powers, by daring to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Amy Tai.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your analysis. This is heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, and terrifying, as everybody says. I'm curious about the inner workings of like the negotiations. Who is it that is it only Putin and Zelensky who need to be at the table, or are there under layers underneath of the advisors and counselors to these leaders who can be negotiating, and is there a way to reach those people who can influence? Since it seems like
Okay. All right. Well, let's see here. Trump would like to end the war in Ukraine. He would like, my analysis and that of everybody else that I listen to agree that Trump would like to end the war in Ukraine and accede to most or all of Russia's demands. Let it have the 4 provinces. Let Ukraine never be able to join NATO. Let it have a very limited military. Let Russian speakers learn Russian in school and let the Russian language be used in Ukraine, and various things, right? Uh, but the military-industrial congressional think tank complex has more power than President Trump has, and they don't agree with letting Russia have a resounding victory in Ukraine. And so the flip-flopping that you see going on a daily basis of President Trump is, on the one hand, he's saying what must be said if the war is to be ended. On the other hand, he's saying what is necessary to keep the military-industrial complex from mobilizing to throw him out of office or something worse. So that's why you see Trump flip-flopping all the time, because he's trying to accomplish contradictory tasks every single day that he's in office. Those are the pressures that he's under. And all the people that I listen to, we're all just waiting with bated breath to find out, can Trump withstand the pressure from the military-industrial complex, or will he give in? And as far as Zelensky, Zelensky is virtually irrelevant to the negotiations to end this war. He is a proxy of the United States. He was put in power essentially by the United States. He was sold this bill of goods that we would back him to the end in a fight with Russia. Our idea all along was just weaken Russia over the bodies of the Ukrainians. Didn't give a damn about the Ukrainians. And most of the people in positions to influence Trump and to negotiate are part of the complex. They're carryovers of the last 30 years of dominance by the neocons and their neocon ideology of preserving U.S. global hegemony. So there are very few people who, in our administration, who are capable in any way, shape, or form of negotiating a peace with Russia. There's one who is, and now I forget his name. He's the one who's been doing these negotiations.
Witkoff.
Yeah, Witkoff. He's about the only one who would have a chance of being a reasonable negotiator. But see, the problem is he worked for Trump. So he sincerely tries to strike or start deals with the Russians or in the Middle East war. But then as soon as he puts the deal on the table, Trump does something that completely destroys it, So even the one negotiator that we have who's doing some good work can't get anywhere because of the person that he works for. Russia, in its foreign minister, has probably the best international negotiator in the entire world, and has a body of personnel perfectly capable of participating in meaningful negotiations to end the war. I think that on the negotiating front, unfortunately, the problem is on the U.S. side.
Okay. Alan Zuckerman. Oh, Anatole, sorry. I think you can mute yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we have a group here locally. We discuss the situation in Ukraine, and there is a debate between the people who think that Putin will take the entire Ukraine, or Putin will just take Donbass. Richard, what do you think about this perspective? What's the future? And Brian, too, what are your opinions, Guy? If you try to be prophets.
Okay. Well, Russia has always stated that in terms of territory, their only objective is to create a safe buffer zone in Ukraine to make Russia significantly safer from United States missiles, basically, and guided bombs launched from aircraft that can extend the range of the aircraft about 60 miles. And I found, and neither does anybody else that I listen to, found any evidence that Russia wants to go beyond that. Now, in order to accomplish that, it well, it will have to go to the Danube River, at least in the south, in the Zaporizhia region. But it doesn't have to do so in the north. It doesn't have to go all the way to Kiev in the northern part of the Danube there. It doesn't have to do that. The northern border is fairly secure with the ally Belarus, which also now has been armed with nuclear weapons by Russia. And Russia may feel that it has to move a little bit in Kharkiv region up in the northwest. That is not an oblast that Russia has demanded, but they may feel necessary to go within within Ukraine, 50, 60, 70 miles or something like that, in order to create this buffer zone up there, because that's where Ukraine is closest to Moscow, right? In the northeast, it's only 350 miles to Moscow.
Yeah.
So that's what I think Russia wants territorially. And I don't think it wants any more than that. Now, maybe if the war continues and they get more annoyed with the continuing hostility of the West, maybe they would decide to go all the way to the what's the river? What am I?
Dnieper.
Yeah, to the Dnipro,
Dnipro.
all the way up north to south, all the way to the eastern. They can leave Kiev on the other side of the river, but not on the eastern side of there. They might feel constrained at some point to go that far, but that's not what their stated objectives were. And everything I can gather indicates that the last thing Russia wants is Western Ukraine, because there's a lot of good reasons why Western Ukrainians hate Russians. And as we all know, it goes back to when the Bolsheviks took power in order to defend themselves from the white Russian army and their allies in the U.S. and Western Europe who were trying to defeat the Bolsheviks. They
Holodomor.
cannibalized Ukraine. They took Ukraine's food to support its army, and millions of Ukrainians starved to death because of what the Russians did in Ukraine in the 1920s. There are other reasons for
1930s.
a lot of Ukrainians to hate Russians. And the last thing Russia wants is to be eternally bogged down in guerrilla warfare in Western Ukraine. So anyway, that's my essentials on your question.
Okay, we have a number of people still. Jane Gruen, and then after that, Mary Sifferlin.
Brian may have wanted to add something.
Oh,
Yeah,
Brian,
since
sorry, go
Anatole,
ahead.
Asked, I'll just give a short answer, which is I think that the sides in this conflict should be open about what an acceptable end looks like and negotiate. We're not even there yet, right? And this is why I really advise people, and I understand that people want to play the blame game, and I see it in the chat. I see folks who are together on encouraging negotiations to find an end to this war argue amongst themselves. And I just want to remind everyone, we're not in the majority yet. We're not there yet. We are still, we're trying to be a loud minority and move people. But I mean, all the focus on who's to blame for this is, I think, not where our energy needs to be. Our energy needs to be, how can we stop this? How can we prevent a new nuclear arms race? that treaty expires in 3 months, people. The last strategic arms limitation treaty between the United States and Russia. We can play the blame game all we want. We've been doing it for, 3 years. I don't think it's really gotten us very far. I think we need to pull together and recognize that we actually have a lot of common ground here, even if we don't agree 100% of the time. And let's focus on moving our government to push for negotiations. And Barbara makes a good point, because U.S. diplomats have often stepped in to actually quash negotiations. That was controversial for a while until the proof came out. Even the New York Times ran with it. Barbara also asked who a good mediator could be. Those talks were taking place in Turkey early on, in Istanbul. And the proof did come out that Boris Johnson from the UK, with the US encouragement, did go in and throw a wrench in those talks. China has also stepped in to try and offer solutions, a peace plan. And just like in the Middle East, I do think that the United States has not been a fair and impartial mediator. We should try and bring in and have, a little less arrogance, a little more respect for the other, almost 200 countries in the world, to bring them in. The solution to the world's problems is not always, I don't think often, going to come from Washington, D.C. It's time that we recognize that we are one nation of many. We are not the indispensable nation. That kind of arrogance, it has to stop. But we ought to stop arguing amongst ourselves and realize we have a lot more in common, and we need to pull together and call for a peaceful solution.
Okay, wise words. Jane Gruen.
Yes, thank you. What I have to say is just Brian it's a perfect segue. What, if anything, can the United Nations do to help and stop and mediate? Same as in with Israel and Gaza. We're just one country, and it's a whole world, and the United States, the United Nations is toothless. How can it be? How can it get some teeth?
I'm not the best person to answer that question. Sadly, the U.S. and Israel all by themselves continually veto any moves toward negotiation or peace in the Middle East. And the General Assembly has been quite outspoken on the genocide that Israel's perpetrating. And I'm not really up to speed on what they've pronounced, what the General Assembly has actually voted on regarding negotiations in Ukraine. I believe they have urged negotiations in Ukraine, but unfortunately, the UN doesn't have the power to make any of this happen. I think
Because
only,
of the Security Council, and
yeah,
the United States has a veto.
and it,
How do you get past
that's
that?
right. That's right.
How do you get past that?
The only way you can get past it is with even larger public demonstrations and more legislative, electoral victories. The tide has to get larger before the people we're talking about put their finger and notice the wind has changed.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I would just add to that Richard was talking about the situation in the 1980s and the Euro missiles crisis that was underway in Europe when there were like 7,200 of these short and intermediate range missiles on each side facing off. And it was a very tense and very dangerous situation. And it was the people that got so alarmed, and the public rose up in country after country, and millions of people marched, and that then helped to spark the freeze movement in the United States, and the passage of the intermediate range, the INF nuclear force treaty, was absolutely crucial in helping to protect the world, and a whole class of weapons got destroyed at that time. And that's the kind of movement we need now. And the question is, how do we get there? How do we break through the tsunami of propaganda by our political leaders and in our mainstream media, to that some kind of peace agreement needs to be reached. And anyway, okay, how about Mary Sifferlin?
Yeah, hi, I had a question about Finland. You're claiming that Russia it didn't attack Ukraine, it's defending itself from the possibility of American nuclear bombs in Ukraine. Are there American nuclear bombs in Finland, a new NATO member?
I don't know. I do know that the bomb that I mentioned, it's either a bomb or a warhead, the B-12, that has a dialable blast, this new terrifying weapon. Those are already deployed in Western Europe. Whether any have been deployed to Finland, I don't know. But the only thing that we do know for certain is that the U.S. bases missile bases in Poland and Romania that have been there for a few years, not too long, but the launch tubes that they use are capable of launching nuclear-tipped Tomahawk missiles, and they could put nuclear warheads on the other missile, the anti-ballistic missile that can also be used as an attacking missile. And that's one of the reasons Russia also, by the way, I didn't say Russia didn't attack Ukraine. Of course, Russia attacked Ukraine, but they attacked Ukraine because they felt that was the only way they could prevent Ukraine joining NATO, since the coup had put a NATO-leaning government in place in 2014. And
No,
since,
actually, it was a EU pointing government. Ukraine did not want to be part of NATO until after Russia annexed Crimea. And if Finland does not have American nuclear weapons, why can't we just, well, Trump said last January that no to Ukraine and NATO. So that doesn't seem to be an excuse for Russia to continue to kill Ukrainians. But why can't we just negotiate that we would never have nuclear weapons in Ukraine, pointed at Russia? Why couldn't that be part of the negotiation?
oh, it would be. It would definitely be part of any negotiations. Absolutely, definitely. I think it must be said regarding Crimea, Crimea was part of Russia for most of 300 years.
200
What's his name? Oh my God. Who gave Ukraine? Who gave?
Khrushchev.
Yeah, Khrushchev in the 50s, he gave Crimea to Ukraine. But of course, then Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. I don't know
But
why
that
he
was
did.
because of the water. Crimea needed water from Ukraine, and Crimea it's not really geographically adjacent to Russia.
Right.
I
But
mean, you could argue that Putin just wanted a land bridge to Crimea.
oh, absolutely. That was key.
That has nothing to do with buffer. He wants the land bridge to Crimea.
Well, you got to understand that Russia only has access to the world's oceans through the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. Well, now, of course, with global warming, it will also have access through the Arctic. But uh, for Russian economy and self-defense, it feels that it must retain access through the Black Sea to the world's oceans. And it cannot do that unless it controls Crimea and has some military forces in Crimea. Otherwise, it will have no control whatsoever over the Black Sea. So anyway, and also, Crimea, since it was part of Russia for most of 300 years, it has a very large Russian population. So,
Okay, we have I think what we're going to do, we have three more people who have had their hand up for a long time. We're going to have them ask their question, and then we're going to wrap it up. We've already gone over. So Robert Richard. I think you can unmute yourself.
Yep, you should get a prompt to do that, Robert. I'll hit the button again for you. It'll ask you to unmute yourself. There you are.
How's that? I thought it was the smudges on my phone. Yeah, I don't disagree with you about anything, Mr. Kucinich. I just like to point out that Professor Kuznick in The Untold History of the United States really points out a lot of good things about how the U.S. Kept this Ukraine war going since World War II. Before even Victoria Nuland was born, the CIA kept the Nazis going into Ukraine since World War II, and then when Admiral Fallon would invade Iran in that Greater Israel War in 2007, 2008, I remember George W. Bush saying, he's going to go into the Caucasus and he's going to have Ukraine join NATO. I remember George W. Bush saying that after that, since they couldn't go into Ukraine and have their 7 wars after 9/11 and stuff. So it goes way back, like you were saying. You were even going way back about the 20s and everything and 30s. I mean, even Churchill was pro-Nazi, and the Bush family, Prescott Bush, they were all Nazis, but.
Well, that is one of Russia's, so far, unwavering demands, the denazification of Ukraine, because there are Nazi elements within the military and within the government that Russia feels pose a significant danger to it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, and maybe influencing what Zelensky feels capable of doing, since they're a constant threat. John Palmes, do you have a question?
I do. I finally got the unmute myself. Yes, we say palms just so we can
sorry.
So we can say you got it wrong. No, it's not your fault. We're just arrogant. So here's the deal. I don't believe that there are such things as tactical nuclear weapons. I think we do everybody a disservice by acting as if nuclear bombs are somehow useful. If you can scale one down to where it's a dialable, one nice little blast, it's still going to give you a whole bunch of side effects of nuclear bombs. Why not just use a small tactical bomb? If you can put them down people's stovepipes, do that. Shoot one down Putin's chimney, but why would we want to use nuclear bombs? That's the big question. I don't think that makes sense. So Richard, tell me, how does that make sense? Okay.
Well, I don't think it does make sense, but apparently a lot of people in the neocon political establishment and the military industrial establishment think that it can make sense under certain circumstances. If they didn't think that, then why would they integrate the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield into their battlefield planning? You know, they obviously think that it's possible to use. By the way, the smallest tactical nuke I've ever heard of is this one that I said the smallest dial would be 1/43rd the size of the Hiroshima bomb. Well, that's still 300,000 tons. I mean, what am I saying? That's still 300 tons of TNT equivalent, the tiniest tactical nuclear blast. I mean, the biggest bombs we ever use in battle are 2,000 pounds. That would be 3,000 pounds. You know, so even the tiniest tactical nukes are serious nuclear weapons. And as you say, they would also spread radiation. And yes, I think it makes no sense. And I have not researched this myself, but the people I listen to, a number of them have said that every war game using the introduction of tactical nuclear weapons has resulted in Armageddon. That the war games have indicated that it's a fallacy that you can use tactical nuclear weapons and avoid escalation to all-out nuclear war. I don't know that that's actually a fact that all war games have done that, but that's what apparently is the case. And so, yeah, it makes no sense to use nuclear weapons. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people in power in the United States who either just because they can make a lot of money off making the nuclear weapons, or because they actually believe that the neocon hegemonic doctrine is worth risking nuclear war. You know, they're there, they're up there, and they're calling shots.
Okay, and now I'm going to call on someone that I just have their phone number on the screen. Can they?
Yeah.
Okay, you're unmuted now.
Hi. Okay. Hi. Jake Aronov is my name. Calling in from Chicago. I think you're forgetting something. In 1993, there was a treaty signed by then Russian President Boris Yeltsin. I think it was Yanushchenko in Ukraine, and co-signed by Bill Clinton, saying that Ukraine was to give up its nuclear weapons force. At that time, I believe about a third of, or no, 40% of the world's nuclear weapons arsenal was in Ukraine. They were to give them up to Russia in exchange for security guarantees from the United States and from Britain. And then Yeltsin died, Putin came in, and he went back on that treaty.
How did he go back on it?
Well, he invaded Ukraine, which was part of the treaty.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
They gave up their old nuclear weapons, which I think had to be destroyed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, but no,
in that
have
sense,
no
you're
sympathy.
absolutely correct. He did go back on it by invading Ukraine. That's right.
Right, yeah. Right. So I don't think he has any business being there. I see this as Putin's Vietnam. It doesn't belong there.
Okay, we are now out of time. That we have gone way over what we were supposed to do, and this has been a great conversation. So I urge everyone to take those actions that that Brian told us about and put the information in the chat, and keep up these discussions among yourselves or with Richard, and hopefully we can all work towards peace in Ukraine over the coming period before we have a nuclear war.
Well, thank you all for attending and bearing with my musings. Mhm.
Okay, good job, Richard. Thank you so much.